Hello, everybody. It's time for a book review, and today I am going to be talking about Rick Riordan's The Red Pyramid. You probably all know him from the Percy Jackson series. Well, I'm going to be looking at the Egyptian mythology series. And to sum it up very quickly, this is a series about two siblings, a brother and sister, Carter and Sadie, and the two of them have pretty much been split up for several years. One of them, Sadie, lives with her grandparents, and meanwhile, Carter lives with his dad, and his dad's always traveling the world. And one time a year, their dad gets to have both of them for basically just a few hours. And he decides to take them to go see basically the Rosetta Stone. And while he's there, he blows the thing up, and the god Set shows up, and he's gonna, basically build this red pyramid, and he's gonna try conquering the world with it. And meanwhile, their dad gets trapped in a sarcophagus and he disappears. And that's basically how the story begins. And I'll go ahead and say there's going to be a lot of spoilers in this. And basically, if you liked what you just heard, because I'll go ahead and say this series is similar to Percy Jackson in that these two kids are going to be fighting a lot of monsters, a lot of gods from the Egyptian um, pantheon. So if you feel like that is something that's kind of in your wheelhouse and this series has dual protagonists, then I would say it's a recommend automatically. But there's going to be spoilers, so if you don't want spoilers, you should just go ahead and read this book and then, come back later. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and jump into spoiler territory. So, for me personally, if I have to, well, something I noticed is that with Rick Riordan, if you've been paying attention, pretty much every single Percy Jackson series has about 5 books in it. I'm currently reading the senior year series, and that only has 3 books planned, but everything else has 5, the main books. Meanwhile, the Egyptian books and the Norse mythology books, those only have 3. Now, I'm not saying Rick Riordan didn't plan it that way, but the fact that both of those only have 3 books kind of says to me, like, where's the bread and butter at? Where's the, who do the fans really care about? It's obviously Percy Jackson. It's like, who's had 2 movies that no one likes, but then got a TV show later on? Oh yeah, Percy. Who has a musical? Oh yeah, Percy. So yeah, the Percy Jackson series is clearly the more popular one. I mean, they literally have a spin-off about Apollo, so I'm pretty sure that kind of goes without saying. So I will go ahead and say that following that kind of mentality, I'll say that this is not as strong of an outing as the first Percy Jackson book. And I know I shouldn't compare them, they're completely different animals, right? This has dual protagonists. Meanwhile, Percy Jackson is told from only one character's perspective throughout 5 books. Meanwhile, this series most likely is always going to go between the 2 siblings. But it's not only that, because, well, I feel like this book didn't really get interesting until the last 70 pages. And that's me personally. And here is the main reason why. There is a little bit of almost like an RPG-esque element, if you know how to play an RPG game from Japan, basically a role playing game, a turns based combat kind of thing. Oftentimes in RPGs, it's very normal for characters to vanish and then reappear again later on. This book definitely falls into that category because along with our 2 leads, they have an uncle named Amos who teams up with them a little bit here and there. There's a girl named Zia. I think that's how you pronounce her, or maybe Zaya. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that name wrong. I didn't look it up. She teams up with them near the end. And then they have Bast, the cat goddess, and she kind of bounces in and out. There's a monkey who helps him a little bit. He's in and out. And I feel like that's kind of what happens in this series. Well, at least in this particular book. And I hope that that's not what's going to happen in the rest of the series. Because I'll go ahead and say probably Percy Jackson's strongest element was that you had Percy's your main character, and then you had Annabeth and Grover. And once the three of them become a team, for the rest of that book, they stay together. They don't split up. They're always together. So you know everything pretty much you need to know about them by the time the book is over. This does flesh out its characters, don't get me wrong. Red Pyramid does. But I don't feel the same tenderness I do with the Percy Jackson characters. I don't feel like I know them as well. I mean, Carter and Sadie, yes, we know them quite well. Carter is a kind of a nerdy African-American kid who's always had to go around with his dad and hasn't really got to have a normal life. Meanwhile, Sadie is, if she lived in a different time period, she'd probably be a punk rock chick. She's kind of, I guess, borderline there to a certain extent. I mean, she wears some combat boots, so she doesn't like to be super feminine. She's almost a bit of a tomboy. She has issues with having to stay with her grandparents and never having her dad around. Meanwhile, Carter has issues with having to go around with his dad and never really getting to settle down anywhere. You know, both of them have their issues. Both of them are upset and struggling with the fact that their mom is gone. So there's a lot with these two characters. And the side characters have a lot going for them as well, but my problem is we don't get to spend as much time with them because this book is constantly bringing people in, pulling them out, bringing them in, pulling them out. So for me, it really, I think it hurt the book in overall getting invested in every single one of the characters. But something it does well, I will say, is the action. However, I feel like some of the action, while there is a rhyme and a reason to it, because basically, while the main characters, Carter and Sadie, are trying to stop Set, who's basically a god of chaos, for lack of a better way of putting it, who's trying to, take over the world, there's these magicians, these Egyptian magicians from the House of Life, and they're trying to stop the kids as well, because something I've not mentioned is that this has a different element than Percy Jackson. In Percy Jackson, the main characters are half-bloods. They're half man, half god. Meanwhile, in the Red Pyramid, the Kane Chronicles series, there's characters who have something called the blood of the pharaohs, which basically means, they can use magic and stuff like that. So there's a lot of things they could do, but something that they can really do that's interesting is that they can actually embody a god. So they can literally rely on a god's powers. She had Isis, he had Horus, and so they get to rely on their abilities throughout the book. Sometimes they don't do as well with it, sometimes they do better with it, particularly near the end. That's an interesting element. But I don't know, I feel like the Percy Jackson action is a lot better. That's just personal preference. And I feel like as the story goes on and the characters get more abilities, the action gets a little better. Because, let's be honest, Percy, he's not a Gary Stu or a Mary Sue or anything like that, but, he's kind of kicking tail from the very beginning. Meanwhile, these two are kind of running a little bit. I'm not saying they don't do a little bit of action, and they do save some, they save their tails here and there, but they do have to rely on Zia and Bast and Amos at points. So they do get a lot of help, a lot more help than Percy did in the long run. And that probably is another element that kind of hurt these kids just a little bit. But they have a lot of encounters with different gods throughout the book, which each encounter is interesting, I guess, in its own way. Some are better than others, in my personal opinion. I'm not as familiar with Egyptian mythology. I look forward to reading the other books, mainly because I want to learn more about the mythology in a very easy to understand format without having to dive in too much of the research myself. Yes, I'm being a little lazy. Sorry. But I don't know. It just, I feel like despite this book being longer, it lacks a lot of the polish that Percy Jackson did. Percy Jackson's about close to about 150 pages shorter, but it's a better told story than this was. Of course, that's my opinion. However, something this series did great was the climax, because our main characters go in there to fight Set. Set had set them up from the beginning. Both of them embody their individual god, and they absolutely obliterate Set. They end up finding out that there is, which this is something I do like what Rick Riordan does, is that there's a greater evil. There's the great snake that's going to destroy everything if they're not careful, and Set was just a pawn in the game. I liked that element. That was cool. Which at the end they kind of, basically they have Set in the palm of their hand, and they're like, listen, we know your secret name, because they do secret names in this series where basically you know their true name, they're under your control. But they basically have, they got Set's arm kind of twisted, and he's going to have to do whatever they say. And I'm like, ooh, that's going to be a cool element in a later book. I hope so. It's going to be cool to have Set be this like reluctant ally, even though he really doesn't want to be. That will be cool. I look forward to that. But the climax was really, really good. I liked the wrap up, because they definitely do an all's well that ends well. I guess I won't spoil too much there, just in case anyone's gotten this far and they weren't convinced to read the books, and now they're like, oh, I want to read them. But one thing I didn't like about this, at the very end, there's this author's note, because at the end of the story, basically throughout the entire tale, there's this little narrative device where the two kids are basically recording everything on a cassette, and it's going to be given to somebody. I assume it's a cassette, but they're recording what happened on their adventure, and basically they're going to send a copy to somebody or a few somebodies, and hopefully they might publish it or do something with the story. And that was, I like that, the way that was done, and especially when you get to the end, I kind of liked it. It almost had like a Terminator feel. It's like, I'm gonna record our adventure here so that you can know what happened. That was cool. And at the end, though, Rick Riordan left a little author's note where he tries almost to do a "this is a true story" kind of thing. I don't know what's going to happen next. And he doesn't really sign it himself, but this is where I didn't really like that as much. I felt like that was kind of weak. I know Rick Riordan kind of does, like, the main characters are talking to the audience, like, maybe you could be a half-blood, maybe you could be one of the Egyptian blood of the pharaohs, but maybe you're a son of the Norse gods. I don't know if that one is in the Norse mythology series, but I'm going to assume so for now. But I feel like it doesn't work as, this whole author's note just doesn't seem to work for me. It's not like Lemony Snicket's Series of Unfortunate Events, which makes the story have this extra level of credibility, even though it's a completely fake story. But it's kind of cool that it's a pen name that's a character in the book. I almost feel like Rick Riordan could have went for that. I don't know how you would have done it, because his name's literally on the book, Rick Riordan. That's what they're expecting, Rick Riordan. So if you put someone else's name on it, it's not going to work as well. But I don't know. I feel like if he had left the author's note, I wouldn't have lost anything. It didn't give us anything, and there was no great loss. But overall, I'll say this. This is a good introduction. I do not think this is a book I'm going to read over and over again. I've had to read Percy Jackson for various reasons. I've had to read the first book a couple of times. But I don't think I'm going to want to read this one like that. I enjoy it every time I read Percy Jackson, and it always seems to have a little bit more meaning to it every time I read it. I don't know about this one. I might get back to it one day, but I don't think so. But regardless of that, regardless of it just not really being my cup of tea, I am looking forward to the things they've set up later. Probably one of my favorite plot twists in this story, spoilers, is that Zaya, whatever how you pronounce her name, she was actually not real, because there's these little clay little servants that can be made to go in somebody's stead. And basically the Zia that they've encountered the entire story is actually a clay servant. And she dies at the end, so they realize that the real Zia is out there somewhere. And I feel like, ooh, has somebody been watching or playing Kingdom Hearts? Has somebody played Kingdom Hearts? I mean, his books did get published by Disney, so it makes me wonder, like, did Disney tell you had to do like a Kingdom Hearts kind of thing where it's like, oh no, Shion, don't die. Who am I going to have ice cream with? If you know that reference, good for you. If you don't, go play Kingdom Hearts. There's a lot of fun there and some things you can laugh at as well. But still, I'm looking forward to reading the other books. I guess I'll go ahead and read the second one pretty soon. I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully it'll be really good. I need a good book. But either way, thanks for listening, and you have a great day. Bye.